Good morning and welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thanks for joining me this morning. I'm just a couple of minutes late. I got distracted by trying to fix a problem with a ham radio, but that's just my problems, not anybody else's. Good morning. Thank you for joining me. Lucille, good to see you as well. You skidded in right before I did, that's for sure. All right, so let's go ahead and get jumping in. I'm going to start as an intro here with a piece from journalist Jason J. Smart. And he starts off with the bold words, Russia is winning. Then he clarifies what he means. Ukraine, fortunately, Russia is not making strategic gains, but Ukraine is just one front in Russia's wars. We may win the battle of Ukraine, but then lose the global war. Moldova just had its first round of presidential elections. Now, this is from a couple of days ago where he was talking about this. They had just finished their first round of presidential elections, where a referendum to support the European Union only won by 50.39%. The pro-European president is projected to lose to a Russia-aligned candidate in a second round next Sunday. I might have missed this, but I believe the Moldovan elections resulted in the election of a pro-European president. Let me go take a fact. Let me just take a quick look at that. Let's see who won the Moldovan election. Yes, the pro-European Union, Maya Sandu, did win that election in the end. So that was a prediction that did not come true, thankfully, for Moldova. But it was a rough one at the time. Georgia's national elections have just been stolen by the pro-Russian oligarch who controls the country in a fashion that makes North Korean elections look free, fair, and democratic. Georgia is a basket case right now. North Korea feels so sure that the West's red lines mean nothing that it is now sending soldiers to assist Russia in invading Ukraine as they study how to wage war, something that jeopardizes the security of our allies, South Korea and Japan, who are nervously monitoring China's increased aggressiveness. China, which has rising influence across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, continues to express credible threats of a future invasion of Taiwan. And Taiwan is seeing all this going on and going, we aren't so sure that we're going to have the assistance we need. Russia is deeply entrenched in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso as Francophone Africa moves into Russia's orbit. Russia, facing only harshly worded statements from the West, is overthrowing democratically elected governments. Iran is already sending drones and assistance to Russia. The good news was Israel's incredible operation to eliminate Iran-backed terrorists in Lebanon and other countries, but Iran remains Russia's ally in places like Venezuela, where the dictator is wanted by the U.S. for being a narcotics kingpin. The U.S. itself is facing a tight 2024 election, which has just completed, and we'll talk about in just a moment here. The Americans continue to be bitterly divided, including over foreign policy. Canada has been facing waves of pro-Russian propaganda and influence operations, much like European countries. Europe, once robustly united, is being led by weak leaders who have failed to counter Russia's rise. Hungary and Slovakia are dominated by Putin's lackeys, a symptom of the reckless populism spreading on the continent. Russia globally sees that the tide is turning their direction. North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia are effectively changing the world order. The West is sitting idly by, unwilling to challenge those seeking to bring the rules-based post-World War II order to an end, I believe is what he means there. Russia's war for world dominance is just beginning. Every day of idle indecision by the West, postponing the inevitable, only makes the price of inaction go up. Thought that was a great post from journalist Jason J. Smart talking about the overall situation in the world. Again, this is from about a week and a half ago now, but it felt very relevant to share at this point. So let's go ahead and talk about the elections in the U.S. because it's going to have a great deal of effect on the war in Ukraine. Much as people like to dismiss it as a directly relevant one, it's big. And we're already seeing some of the fallout, so I'm just going to touch on a few of those things related to Trump's win. One of the funniest things I think came out of it was the South Korean president resumed golf for the first time in 8 years. That's because if you want to get in touch with Trump, the best way to do it is on the golf course. According to a statement from the head of the state's office, Yoon Suk Yeol, it was returned to training for the first time since 2016. According to experts, the politician decided to appease Donald Trump, who won the presidential election. Yoon has already told the press that he called Trump and agreed to meet with him in the near future. This is just one of the first indications that the world is starting to address the change in political leadership in the U.S. Now, of course, Russia put out their own statement stating that, well, certain powers assisted Trump in his rise back to power. And this could force him to rely on those forces that brought him to power, making basically a veiled threat that Trump's going to have to deliver upon some form of previously agreed upon quid pro quo. I think that anybody who's relying on Donald Trump to carry out in that regard is taking a big risk. We'll just put it that way. That said, did Donald Trump receive assistance from Russia for the election? Maybe yes, maybe no. It depends. Then there's things like Donald Trump has repeatedly proposed firing missiles into Mexico. He's thinking of sending special forces, declaring war on the drug kingpins and cartels that are in Mexico and taking military action against them. This indicates that Donald Trump is not exactly anti-war, but is big on use of force. And there's no contradiction in his mind for it. Whether you can call it a war or not doesn't change the fact that people die. And that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind here. The point I'm addressing right now is that predicting Trump is a challenge in and of itself, because Trump tends to respond to the last person who had his ear. Therefore, you could have, if Vladimir Putin is relying on Donald Trump to make things go his way, well, it's going to depend on who had his ear last and how much he trusts that person at that point in time. So we're looking at a very much questionable situation in that regard. I'm not going to claim that it's a good news for Ukraine or bad news for Ukraine. I'm just stating it is news. Moving on to some other reactions here. Even the UK is saying that that Donald Trump is wildly unpredictable, and the world is going to be asking, what will he say or do next? And that unpredictability is actually one of the things that makes him an interesting figure to watch on the world stage. And there's going to be a lot of that question, because there was a lot of that question going on during his first term as president. People are like, well, what's he going to do with this? And that volatility and questionability meant that many people across the world, many dictators and things like that, were kind of like holding off, saying, what's he going to do here? The odds are, I mean, to be brutally honest, it's just as likely that Donald Trump will cut off Ukraine aid as he will bomb Moscow. It's just, there's no way to put an exact figure on exactly what's going to happen there. In other related news, Elon Musk has been seen at Mar-a-Lago pretty much every day since Donald Trump won, and it's pretty clear that he's taking a big role in Donald Trump's staff picks. Also, it's been announced that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will head up a new Department of Governmental Efficiency. What that's going to look like will be is yet to be determined. So be prepared for that. Both Zelensky and Vladimir Putin believe the personal factor, kind of like I said, whoever had Donald Trump's ear last, will help with Trump. This isn't surprising. Trump's character has overlap with both of them. Disruptor and showman plus most postmodern autocrat. Worrying thing for Ukraine is Russia has better lobbying, and that will probably prove more decisive. And there's a lot to be said about that. Russia has spent a great deal of time and money creating the influence operations that have resulted in people like David Sachs, Jeffrey Sachs, Douglas McGregor, other people that are staunchly claim that they are not pro-Russian, but in every way are stating the perspective of Russia in everything they talk about. Again, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily Russian agents in the classic sense of being paid by Russia, but they have been influenced to those positions in one way or another. Are those positions honestly arrived at, or are they paid for? I don't know. Can't speak to that. What I can speak to is that that is a concern for those who are trying to influence Donald Trump. Now, and I apologize for the for this here. That's what the Russian state TV. It's blurred out in the key parts here. This was Putin has sent a very direct post-election message of disrespect and dominance to Donald Trump by broadcasting naked photos of Trump's wife and U.S. First Lady Melania Trump on Kremlin TV. This is just a first indication of exactly how much respect to expect out of Vladimir Putin. On the other hand, this could also be a test case in that they are testing the resolve of the new U.S. Leadership and how they're going to respond to Vladimir Putin. And I hate to say it this way. I actually hope Vladimir Putin keeps trying to do these types of pokes, because these are the types of pokes that are going to turn Donald Trump against him. Not that Donald Trump is ashamed of his wife's history or he wouldn't have married her, but trying to establish dominance with Trump through shame is a fool's errand at best. Therefore, try to shame him all you want. Try to disrespect him all you want. All that's going to do is make Donald Trump not like you even more. So yes, he's playing with fire here. By the way, Robbie, glad to see you this morning. Jerry, glad to see you as well. Always glad to have all of you on board. But this is just kind of, again, me talking about my first thoughts and kind of what other people are thinking about Donald Trump's win in the U.S. presidential election and the results that could be for Ukraine. Now, from French aid to Ukraine, Donald Trump is too wise to agree to what would be the biggest territorial annexation in history in 75 years. Too wise to forget that no just and lasting peace can be made behind the backs of Ukrainians and over the heads of Europeans. That would enshrine the law of the strongest, which would have very serious consequences in Europe and in other regions of the world. On the front line, which they visited recently, the Ukrainians are pushing back this Russian army, which is forced to seek support from North Korea because it has difficulty mobilizing at home. We will continue to support the Ukrainians, and that is from J.N. Barrett. Here's the thing. If you're going to take the language that's going to influence Donald Trump, this is the language. Too wise. That will absolutely stroke his ego, and that is the best way to say it. He is too wise to have missed these clear and obvious aspects that will be absolutely clear to a wise man like Trump. This appeals to Donald Trump. This strokes his ego and is the way you get him on your side. Playing the game with trying to shame him into doing what you want absolutely will backfire. And that's why I think Vladimir Putin may find that that's going to backfire on him as well. Be interesting to see. As somebody else said before I move on here, if Russians have compromat on Donald Trump, publish it. The man's gone through so many scandals and so much garbage. It'll just be one more win on his little checklist right there. One more thing that he's managed to do and nobody really cares about, and he got elected anyway. So I think that the Russians might be realizing that what they're looking at may not be exactly what they were hoping for. Now, Chris O responded to this, to the French aid to Ukraine post. The problem with this viewpoint is that Trump clearly believes in the law of the strongest, relied on it in his previous administration, and has followed it for decades. That is a serious concern. But again, how you talk to Trump will change how Donald Trump talks to you or addresses your viewpoint. The more that you can make Donald Trump into the wise man in the situation, the more likely he is to like your position. Whether that's good or bad is going to depend again on who gets his ear. Whereas Trump Jr., Donald Trump Jr. shared a video of falling dollars on Ukrainian president with the caption, "You're 38 days from losing your allowance." This is just more political. This is basically red meat for his audience here. Donald Trump will Donald Trump. I don't think Trump Jr. gets as much of a vote as he thinks he does. From Tindar, though, this is going out other effects outside of the U.S. If Donald Trump wins, this will cause a catalyst effect on the German government. And I've already seen signs of this, by the way. There's already been indications that the coalition of Schulz's government has collapsed at this point in time. My understanding is that they've got new elections scheduled for February-ish, going from memory on this. But Tindar states, I was warning just before the elections that we should prepare for this outcome. I even said that we have to do this even when Harris wins, and I've been saying this for years. And then Tindar talks about people disregarding his advice. But let's get down to the third paragraph here. I suspect with high probability that Schultz was waiting and hoping for Harris win, because this would have given him more cover for his sheepish and indecisive handling of all foreign policy issues. That is probably over for good. This is going to be a watershed moment. There are no excuses, no shortcuts. Germany and Europe have relied way too long on the U.S. support. In the long run, this has been inevitable, and like with most things, it is sometimes better when there is no chance to delay. Like it or not, these are the facts. And it's true. Europe is going to have to step up and get their production lines running at full force. Otherwise, Europe's not going to have Europe anymore. They're going to lose relying on the U.S. as their sole production partner when the U.S. is being unreliable. Therefore, Europe is going to have to stand up. They're going to have to use their GDP, which is actually pretty close to rivaling the U.S. GDP as a union. They're going to have to get serious about their military production, and they're going to have to get that stuff moving. Otherwise, they really won't stand a chance against Russia in the future. Some other fallout here, possibly Marco Rubio might become the next Secretary of State in the Trump administration, and he's had some comments about Putin and being a gangster and a thug in the past. So possibly this could be a positive sign for Ukraine. They might end up in a situation where they have a Secretary of State that's pretty much saying no to Vladimir Putin right off the bat. On the other hand, Marco Rubio tends to be a little bit wishy-washy, so take your pick. Is this going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Both are possibilities. Robbie says he was named last night. From his understanding, I caught this from a couple of days ago, or yesterday, I should say. But so it wasn't official at that point. Apparently it is now. So yeah, Marco Rubio. So possibly a good thing. Possibly. I consider it at worst, it's going to be a neutral thing. And I think it's probably going to be a good thing for Ukraine in this regard. Now, here's where things get interesting. According to the Washington Post, Donald Trump called Putin and told him not to escalate the war in Ukraine. And according to the media, that conversation took place on November 7th, with Trump reminding Putin of Washington's sizable military presence in Europe, and a conversation saying they wanted to discuss the resolution of Ukraine's war soon. Seems pretty straightforward, but the thing is that Vladimir Putin has said that he was not going to be the one to call Donald Trump, because that would indicate that he was basically subservient to him in some way. And in fact, Peskov has denied that this phone call ever took place. This would be typical for Russia. Even if the call took place, they'd deny it took place. And if a call never took place, they'd still deny it. So take your pick as to which one you're going to believe overall. Now, the Russians are also saying that whether Donald Trump does or doesn't want to bring Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table is not Donald's call. Not yet, at least. And to a certain extent, that's true. Obviously, he's not president yet, but more than that, unless the U.S. is going to get directly militarily involved in either side, as in with its own troops, planes, and equipment, they cannot force either side to the negotiating table. If they cut off support to Ukraine, I can guarantee you that will not bring Ukraine to the negotiating table. It will create a partisan movement, a guerrilla movement, as Ukraine begins to lose even more territory, and they will be fighting from the shadows instead of in open combat. They'll also be calling on Europe to get their butts in gear and get the production lines a rolling. And if the U.S., goes the other extreme and actually puts troops on the ground on Ukraine's side, well, that's not going to bring Russia to the negotiating table. The only thing that's going to do that is when Vladimir Putin is going to stop holding on to his ambitions for European conquest. So there you go. Or as they also said, if Trump stops supporting Ukraine, Putin will win and take over all of Ukraine. And then an enthusiastic and very angry Russia will appear at the European Union border with Ukraine's army in addition to its own. Sounds like a very good plan, say the Russian propagandists. So we'll keep that in mind as things go forward. Hang on a second. I got to remember why I wanted to bring this up here. Okay. Now, part of the results here, we saw North Korea starting to get involved in the war before the elections took place. Now the soldiers, the North Korean soldiers, are getting into the front lines and are being told to get in the middle of it. But the thought was that the Russians were ordered to retake these lands before the U.S. elections. That didn't work, obviously. And they put a lot of faith and effort and work into this to try and push the Ukrainians out of Kursk before the elections. When that didn't happen, that leaves Russia in a weak appearing position to now President-elect Trump. And what does Trump like more than anything else? He likes winning. And with Kursk still in parts of Kursk still in Ukrainian hands at the election, he's looking at a Russia that has lost some of its own sovereign territory in this fight. That does not look like a winning to him. They wanted to have that in place. Now their next goal has been set to before Trump's inauguration, which is when Donald Trump will be able to start having real effects on what's going on in Ukraine. And the idea is that if the Ukrainians hold none of Kursk at that point in time, then Vladimir Putin could be like, "Yep, sorry, we can take some of Ukraine because there's nothing that we're losing of our stuff in the meantime." It will be a position of far greater power if they can pull it off. So that's the reason for the dates. Obviously, they don't want any of Kursk in Ukrainian hands. But as long as there is Kursk in Ukrainian hands, Vladimir Putin cannot negotiate for the parts of Ukraine because they would be negotiating from a position of weakness. And Donald Trump likes winners, not losers. They're going to have to watch this. So that was my thought process on that. The U.S. Department of Justice has confirmed that Iran did try to engage in an assassination operation against Donald Trump. Obviously, they're very bad at it. If so, keep that in mind. Phil states they already trying to remind Trump that they own him. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree with you that Europe is going to be carrying the bulk of the ball. I agree with that. My point is that it's going to depend from the U.S. side. It's going to depend a lot on who has Trump's ear at what point in time when the rubber hits the road. So we're going to be watching that very closely. From Crimean Wind, several points from an interview with Mikhail Gonchar about the results of the U.S. elections and Ukraine's expectations from the new administration. Trump's peace plan does not exist. Media publications about it are sounding out of Ukraine's position by various influence groups. The U.S. is not North Korea. Trump alone will not be able to break the entire system in 24 hours. This is the inertia of the state machine. Trump's uncertainty is uncertainty with an emphasis on decisiveness. Biden's uncertainty is uncertainty in doing nothing. Russia will try to influence the issues of the status of Crimea. Ukraine must firmly stand its ground. The position on territorial integrity must be unshakable. And on December 31st, the U.S. sanctions against Nord Stream 2 expire. The Russian-German gas lobby will work to launch the surviving thread. So overall, that's kind of some thoughts that came out of from basically the Ukraine perspective on what the Trump victory means. I generally kind of think this is accurate. I think the Trump peace plan would be best said as elements of a peace plan. And then it's more of an opportunistic one at that, where he's looking for opportunities to mark an easy, fast victory for Donald Trump, one way or the other. Okay, there's more about Rubio as Secretary of State. Then there was this opinion piece that came out in the Kyiv Independent. Trump holds all the cards in Ukraine's peace gamble. Will he use them? And while I went through the whole article, and I'll just paste it over for you guys to read at your leisure. This is where things get interesting. Robbie, you have a good day. Thanks for joining. We'll see you. Well, let me know what you think when you get back. Phil, always glad to have you. Al, glad to have you on board. I'm glad to have you working as well, working and lurking. Crypto Miskatonicism. Sorry, it's gonna take me a while to get your name down. Welcome aboard. Always glad to have all of you here. And the article, by the way, of this opinion piece is very interesting. A good rundown of kind of the situation and kind of the positives and negatives. So there's a lot of cards that Donald Trump will be holding the moment that he takes office on January 20th. He holds these cards, and the question is, how will he use them? And I'm not going to speculate further on that. That's for a future video where I hope to be having a conversation with a certain friend that will talk about some of those options. But overall, there are positives, there are negatives. There's a lot of mixed bag here. The question is going to be, who does Donald Trump see as winning? And who does Donald Trump trust when the chips are down? So that's Phil, I have no clue. I've never actually seen if he's played any cards at all. Golf, he plays lots of golf, but I've never seen him play cards. There is one thing that might be a good sign for Ukraine in particular. Trump's pick of Representative Mike Waltz, a former Green Beret, as National Security Advisor. Now, Waltz has made some fairly pro-Ukraine comments in the past. He's criticized the aid packages for size and timeliness in the past. Generally, he seemed to be somewhat positive towards Ukraine, but he has had some calls for things like more oversight of the aid, watching for the exact nature of it, sending the right stuff at the right time. He's had a lot of criticism for it. So, but overall, he might be a good pick. This comes from an NPR interview that was shortly before the election, where Waltz stated, Donald Trump is very focused on ending the war rather than perpetuating it, and really crafting a strategy to get both sides to the table. I think it's perfectly reasonable that this is going to come to some type of diplomatic resolution. And first and foremost, you would enforce the actual energy sanctions on Russia. That's not capitulating to Russia right there. Start with those energy sanctions, he says. Russia is essentially a gas station with nukes. Putin is selling more oil and gas now than he did pre-war through China and Russia. And you couple that with unleashing their energy, our energy, lifting our liquid natural gas ban, and his economy and his war machine will dry up very quickly. I just spoke with the Speaker of the Parliament of Lithuania. She buys 85% of their oil and gas from Texas and Louisiana. She said, "What do you want me to do? Go back to buying from Russia? Because we've constrained our energy supplies." So I think that will get Putin to the table. We have leverage, like taking the handcuffs off of the long-range weapons we provided to Ukraine as well. And then, of course, I think we have plenty of leverage with Zelensky to get him to the table. So that's some fairly encouraging statements right before the election. He did, however, call for European countries to increase their support to ensure regional stability. That's going to be true no matter what. Europe cannot just rely on the U.S. as their arms dealer. They're going to have to stand up their own internal industry to try and get their own militaries up to snuff and working well. So some positive indications from the National Security Advisor pick. So that's good news. Phil says Justin Trudeau's targeted retaliatory sanctions was playing cards. If Trump's drill policy goes forward and reduces oil prices, the land war slows some. Exactly. The energy question for Russia is the question at this point in time. If they can successfully restrict those energy supplies coming from Russia by reducing the costs coming from America or other oil-producing countries, that will restrict Russia's ability to actually get money to wage the war. All right, so let's go and get more into the war itself here. A dam near Kurakhove has been blown up and water is flooding nearby villages, according to Ukrainian social media channels. Russian media also report the destruction of the dam near the village of Stary Terny, which is one of the targets of the Russian offensive. Russian forces are approaching it from two directions to encircle Kurakhove from the rear. It is currently unknown who blew up the dam. Now, I have to add that last line specifically because both sides have blamed the other. The dam is currently in Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainians have in the past destroyed dams for immediate, due to tactical requirements in order to get by. The Russians have also destroyed dams and done it deliberately and targeted with missiles and things like that. So both sides have a history of targeting these types of dams. Who blew it up is a question that's going to have to be answered. It looks like, if you watch this video right here, it looks like a controlled demolition of the dam itself. It does not look like a dropped piece of ordnance. At least there's no indications of it in the video. Now, as I said, Ukraine currently has control of that area. That does not preclude the thought that Russia may have snuck a crew into the area to be able to destroy this dam. Take your pick on who you believe as to who destroyed the dam. The road surface basically didn't quite collapse, but was close to it. The immediate effects didn't directly affect civilians initially, but there have been, because most of the nearby villages have been evacuated. Overall, though, this does flood some of the area downstream from there and could result in some practical issues for attack and defense going forward. More to the point, again, like this location here, we don't know who blew it up. Both sides will try and maximize what they can do with the changing situation there. Let's go ahead and go to the news out of Ukraine itself. And this one caught my eye because this is a now up-armored Baba Yaga drone that was hit by a Russian FPV drone. That dynamic armor that was on it was repurposed from a tank and allowed the drone to actually return to base for repair and redeployment at a later date. Ukrainian engineers outfitted the drone with this specialized armor, typically used to shield tanks from the attacks. The armor effectively absorbed the impact, allowing the Baba Yaga to withstand the strike and safely return to base. That's pretty good. Let's go ahead and unmute this here. Residents of Kherson sang the Ukrainian anthem in one of the city's supermarkets yesterday to mark the second anniversary of their liberation from Russian occupation. Even though Kherson is getting bombed daily by Russia, Khersonians celebrate their freedom. This is why we keep fighting. I just thought that was a beautiful thing to see. Russian strikes on Zaporizhia have picked up pace. There's a possibility they are working on an offensive in the Zaporizhia area. This was a hit on a residential building. Some people have died, and it's not a pretty picture, put simply. Indications are the Russians have stepped up the attacks in the area of Zaporizhia in hopes of splitting up Ukrainian forces, forcing them to defend on multiple fronts. They also struck Mykolaiv, also residential buildings that were struck. Ukraine has upped their 2025 budget with actually 1.5 billion in weapons production. This is a large chunk of the Ukrainian budget to try and get more development and implementation of new technologies and the expansion of their defense production capacity. And I thought this was interesting. By the way, I've now picked up a new social network called Blue Sky. I'm trying to see some of the sources there as well, try and get some new sources as well. So I'll be expanding beyond X and Telegram and mainstream media sources to this new social network to see what kind of sources I might be able to get that way as well. Ukraine is negotiating with the United Kingdom to train 5,000 to 7,000 students annually for potential future civil service roles, according to Ambassador Zaluzny. This is the type of thought I like to see. You see, one of the things that the criticisms that have been coming up is that Ukraine has refused to draft people under the age of 25. Their hopes are that they'll be able to start families, have kids, get some training, be useful. And then, of course, if they get to 25, when they get to 25, they'll be joining the military, assuming things are still going as they are. This is Ukraine preserving a future generation as best they can. But this is foresight right here. They're training their people to be civil servants so that they can have effective staffing for a future Ukraine at peace. I thought it was really, really good foresight on their part. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Russia, and I've got quite a bit, so I'm going to be kind of flipping through a bunch of it. Caviar prices have skyrocketed due to poachers who blocked rivers with nets in Primorsky Krai several months ago, preventing the fish from going to the spawning grounds from the Sea of Japan. And that location is right about in here, which is in part of Russia here on the eastern side. But overall, that's at least some of the rivers in this area were blocked off with nets that prevented the fish from reaching their spawning grounds, and that's driven up the price of caviar. Seemed like just a weird knock-on effect of the weirdness in Russia. Conscripts in Moscow have begun receiving notifications saying no leaving Russia. You can't leave now. You're now trapped in the country. They'll also get a bunch of other notifications about things they can and can't do until they are potentially conscripted. The Russian state news agency reported that Ukrainians looted the houses of evacuated residents of the Kursk region. And then they cited a village that the Ukrainian armed forces never took as being the source, which indicates that Russian armed forces looted their own village. Once again, of course, The TASS news agency then edited the article and dropped the example entirely from it, trying to hide the fact that they were reporting on Russian looting that instead of Ukrainian looting. What can I say, Phil? You know, all of us are affected by the price of caviar. Not me, but Russia bombed itself 146 times in 2024 so far. The Russian Air Force dropped 4 more bombs in Russia's own Belgorod region in the last 3 days. Some detonated and some were dropped without being armed. Now, I don't know about Russian equipment, but I know that there is the possibility to release a bomb without arming it in some of the equipment. Usually, if you're trying to ditch ordnance for other reasons, so that could just be a release without actually arming that weapon in the first place. Now, why would you be screwing with the fuse on a bomb, dude? Don't do that. That's stupid. Now, this is from yesterday. The day before yesterday, they reported the Russians experienced the largest per day losses, casualties of 1,770. Now, again, this is casualties, meaning killed and wounded, not just killed. That was the largest to date casualty report for a single day. They beat that again yesterday with 1,970 casualties reported, including 23 tanks. Tickle in my throat this morning, and 81 armored personnel carriers. So that's a new high. Now, why do I talk about this? I rarely talk about casualty figures. And to be honest, I don't generally consider them reliable, although they've been proven to be fairly good from the Ukrainians in this regard. But the reason I mention it is because Russia has clearly pulled out all the stops. Now, there's possible reasons for that, including winter, including the election, including trying to spread and break the Ukrainian military before January 20th. But it's clear to me that the Russians have pulled out all the stops. They're putting in all the meat assaults, trying their best to try and resolve this in their favor before the control of the situation goes beyond their grasp. That's what I'm reading out of these numbers. It's almost doubled since just a month ago, which means that Russia is pushing and pushing and pushing with worse and worse quality troops and worse tactical situations. The offensive in Kursk has resulted in such huge, staggering Russian losses because Russia doesn't know how to do warfare except from entrenched positions and meat waves. That's what's scary about it. But that's my analysis as to why these numbers are so high. Bill states, I think Russia can make 5,000 a day. I really do. So for some reason, that is not a challenge I wish to issue to Russia. Injured Russian soldiers are being sent into assaults on crutches, according to interviews with those that survived some of these attacks. They're even ordered to kill their own wounded if they're going to hold up the attack, and are attacked by their own drones if they don't move forward, according to 2 eyewitnesses. And this whole thread here is talking about the crazy situation in certain parts of the Russian front. This is insanity. It truly is. I would pull some parallels from scripture, but I don't have the references in front of me. Just understand that there are parallels for people who have stopped caring enough about their own lives. This thread about the Russian losses and storage bases is really interesting. And the conclusions are, of course, I'm going to point out that we've had this conclusion in various forms over the last 2 years. I've been saying things like Russia will run out of hardware by April 2022, by December 2022, by June 2023, etc. The overall rundown is that currently the estimate is 2025, mid 2025, they start being unable to replace at anything near the current burn rate. Now, the indications I've seen several times now is that the amount of refurbishable equipment, which is what they've been using to keep their numbers up, has dropped significantly. The anything that's left in the storage bases is going to be much harder to refurbish and put into action than anything that's already been put into the field. They took the low-hanging fruit and threw it into the war. Now they've gone through a lot of the harder to reach fruit and gotten the best of it. Now you got the things that have been parted into other machines, or rusting apart, or left with the hatches open in the middle of a rainstorm, or they're having a hard time filling with the older equipment, the used equipment, refurbishing it and bringing it forward. They can still produce new equipment, of course, but their production rates of new equipment is nowhere near sufficient to cover their losses in warfare. Again, this points to a strategy of trying to break Ukraine before they themselves are broken. A war of attrition. It was a good thread, and I thought you'd appreciate kind of the general thought process on it. Of course, we'll believe it when it gets to 2025, 2026, and Russia is now unable to field much equipment anymore. We'll see. And I'm going to pause this here because it is a bit shocking to me. A 62-year-old Russian soldier, a contract soldier, was thrown naked into a pit for forgetting his radio at his position. He's been there 3 days, and if he sits another 4 and survives, he will be released. This is hatred and cruelty. It's beyond wrong. And this is the Russians doing it to the Russians. The Russian 1060th Support Center in Bryansk was struck by drones, with 8 explosions and at least 2 major fires raging. This is from the 10th. This is, again, just continuing Ukraine's campaign to destroy logistics centers, resupply areas, etc. Everything that holds ammunition and can blow up while Ukraine's targeting it. Defense Express writes that the Russians have spotted the Bulava for the first time. Satellite images of the process of arming the R-30 intercontinental ballistic missile, which is one of the elements of the nuclear triad, have appeared in the public domain. Then it would probably be loaded onto one of the Project 955 nuclear submarines, etc. The work of the 12th Main Directorate of the Russian Defense Ministry, which is responsible for the maintenance of nuclear weapons, was demonstrative. So analysts suggest that this is an element of psychological influence. They're showing off, saying, yes, we do have these nuclear weapons. Yes, we can attach them to the missiles. Yes, we can protect them, to prepare them to be fired. With the idea being to be a subtle threat of, we're now ready to fire them at you. A few years ago, the Brits put some tags on beefsteaks so they wouldn't get stolen. Well, the Russians do that to butter now. In fact, there was a big case of, excuse me, there's a big case recently of somebody who stole 25 pounds of butter and was quickly caught and thrown into prison. So even butter is going into sealed packaging in Russia these days because of shortages starting to manifest. Residents of Sheptukovka in the Kursk operational zone recorded an appeal asking for clarity on when they can return to their destroyed homes. During the November 2023 election, we gave our full support to our beloved president, hoping for help and protection. Now they're realizing that they just want it to end so they can go home and be normal again. The Ukrainians are stating that Russians are using fake drones to attack Ukraine, basically a crude parody, or as they call them, perdaya, of a regular drone that does not have an explosive warhead and is sent basically to confuse and distract expensive air defense missiles to attack these instead. So they've got stuff to imitate a real drone, and that would cause Ukraine to waste expensive ammunition on the decoys instead of attacking just the regular drones. No word yet on how successful this is. This just happens to be one that crash landed relatively intact. Another plea from another set of residents from Kursk saying, "We ask you to finally end this cursed war." And the same problem. They just want to go home and have normal lives. Well, that's what they get. An oil depot in Belgorod was attacked as well. This was all from November 12th, just yesterday. So with a petroleum tank on fire, again, Ukraine continues the attacks on Russia's oil infrastructure to take away their ability to earn for their warfare. The central bank is talking about raising the key interest rate in December in order to bring inflation back to the 4% target. They are not sure even that would help, though. Russia's economy is in trouble because it's in super hot inflation. This is talking about the record number of soldiers that was already beaten. Just thought I'd just left that in there. A fuel tanker in Simferopol has also exploded, with explosions continuing. This is as of yesterday. They do have, I believe by now it's actually been extinguished, but I wondered if this was partisan action, a deliberate targeting. The details are scant, but it seems like something that would be very much targeted by Ukraine at this point in time. In that same vein, a car exploded in Sevastopol, targeting a Russian military officer. The blast took out the chief of staff of the 41st Brigade, Captain First Rank Valery Tonkovsky. Witnesses report the explosion was so powerful, it scattered debris across the courtyard, leaving a massive hole. And the additional reports were that the Ukrainian operatives planted an IED under the vehicle. Overall, the man involved in this was in charge of launching Caliber cruise missiles at civilian targets in Ukraine, and he's been pursued for some time now. So the Russian officers should be looking behind their shoulders a lot more, and maybe not driving any cars. Let's go ahead and move over to the international front. I got a lot here as well. I'm going to try and work through it as quick as I can. We're already an hour into this. Wow, I have been talking for way too long. Poland has stated that they will not shoot down missiles and drones over Ukraine. They're only looking at that possibility in their own airspace at this point in time. NATO Secretary General and Macron had a meeting and emphasized that for the safety of their citizens, they need a strong Ukraine, a strong Europe, and a strong alliance. Again, if Europe wants to keep itself safe, Europe's going to have to step up to the plate. The Telegraph writes that British Prime Minister Starmer is pressuring Biden for $20 billion for Kyiv and permission to strike Russia, hoping to get this done before the change of command on January 20th. This is hedging the bets here a little bit. And if they can get those things done before then, well, all to the good for Ukraine, at least at that point in time. France was originally going to send 3 of their Mirage 2000 fighters. That's now up to 6. And looks like they may have up to I think 20 or so by middle or end of next year. Occupied Abkhazia rebelled against the ratification of an investment agreement with Russia. Echo of the Caucasus writes that the massive protests began after the signing of an agreement that allows Russian companies to implement investment projects in the unrecognized republic. The opposition criticized the document, fearing infringement on the rights of local entrepreneurs and strengthening of oligarchic groups. I point this out because we are seeing freedom-loving people springing up in various places, some of them quite surprising, that don't want Russia in their country. Just interesting to see. Forbes writes that Taiwan has probably, quote, probably, sent Ukraine a huge batch of Hawk air defense systems. These are 60-year-old systems, but still 15 batteries of 60-year-old air defense missiles can do a lot of work against a lot of the targets coming in. The European Union has handed over 980,000 shells to Ukraine out of the promised 1 million. They'll have that by the end of the year, and the Czech Prime Minister promised another 500,000 shells separately by the end of the year. That is a huge number of shells and very useful for Ukraine. They need triple that number to keep it up, but they'll make the most of every single one. In Germany, a Ukrainian trucker was killed over a dispute about Putin. 4 truckers were stopped. Were having a little bit of a drink on the side of the road, arguing about Putin. The conflict escalated and turned into a fight. And the youngest, a Ukrainian driver, was killed in the altercation. The other 3 were killed. Were arrested. One of them is a citizen of Uzbekistan. An association of defectors from North Korea handed over leaflets with instructions urging Kim Jong-un's military not to fight against Ukraine, to desert and flee Russia. The South Koreans and the North Korean defectors seem to be pretty interested in helping out Ukraine, with the North Koreans in particular. They have particular skill in this area. Oops. Starmer and Macron are discussing with Joe Biden whether he can be persuaded to give Ukraine permission to fire Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russia. If that happens before Donald Trump takes office, it'll be interesting. What'll be interesting is Donald Trump's response to that. So we'll have to see. I already talked about the 1 million artillery shells. We talked about that. Sorry, I got a few duplicates in here. The opposition leader in Germany, I mentioned earlier that that Scholz's leading coalition had fallen apart and new elections were announced soon. The opposition leader of the Christian Democratic Union, Friedrich Merz, said that his intention was to issue an ultimatum to Vladimir Putin, saying that if he is elected, he may give Russia a 24-hour deadline to end the war, and if his demands are not met, he may advocate delivering the Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine, including potentially enabling Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. Russia's GDP is smaller than that of Italy. The combined GDP of Europe and the US is more than 20 times bigger than that of Russia. Europe and the US don't even need to use their own money. They can take the $300 billion US in frozen Russian assets and give it to Ukraine, according to Harari Yuval. And this is interesting. A lot of times we talk about this juggernaut that is Russia. Their huge ability to produce tanks and equipment and soldiers, and their huge population. But they've got less than a third of the population of Europe. The combined GDP of US and Europe is 20 times bigger than that of Russia. It is a matter of political will alone. That's the only thing stopping us from ending this war in favor of Ukraine. Political will. We have the resources in spades. This is the bit about elections in February for Germany. Russia and North Korea have made it official. They are now in a comprehensive strategic partnership. The fact that Russia had to sign that should tell you how weak Russia's position has become. The first Ukrainian citizens have signed contracts with the Ukrainian armed forces as part of the Ukrainian Legion in Poland. This is a group stood up to attract Ukrainians who have ended up moving out to Poland and get them into the military for Ukraine, trained by Poland and armed by Poland before they can be sent to combat in Ukraine. France is upping its production of AASM bombs up to 1,200 by 2025 to replenish stocks and support Ukraine's defense efforts. That's not enough, guys. Get moving some more. Poland seeks to form a strong alliance with Britain and other key EU nations to prevent any potential sellout of Ukraine if Trump takes the White House. Donald Tusk is set for urgent talks with Macron, NATO chief Rutte, and Starmer because they're concerned about that. Again, with Trump, it's going to be uncertainty in many ways. We'll just have to see what falls out of it in the end. In related news, U.S. serviceman Jack Teixeira was sentenced to 15 years in prison for leaking classified Ukraine war data on Discord. He did express remorse for the actions and took the responsibility for the consequences. Russian drones have been flying into Belarus en masse, according to the report monitoring group Belarusian Hejun. Last night, at least 12 drones crossed from Ukraine into Belarus. There's no real clear reason as to why, but the potential is that since Ukraine has been using electronic warfare, that the navigation of these drones has been scrambled enough that they have ended up going into Belarus instead. That'd be an interesting way to deal with those drones. Joe Biden has stated that he will increase support for Ukraine in the months leading up to Donald Trump's return to the presidency and will seek to strengthen NATO in the meantime. There's been some word that they're planning to literally bulk send all of the approved quantities of assistance that they can instead of making it in smaller chunks. They're going to just basically send all of it they can. I'll believe it when I see it, though, in my thoughts. All right, let's move to the situation on the front lines. There's actually, when you look at the front lines, there's not that much going on as far as territory changing hands. So I got a couple of things to talk about for a moment, and then we'll hit the front lines for an overview and a few tiddly bits in the meantime. There's still plenty to talk about. Just give me a few minutes here. From Andrew Perpetua, I think people overestimate the role of winter on a modern war, but I also think Russia is pushing to capture as much as possible before winter. Just generally speaking, they're pushing to capture as much as possible for many reasons. First, they are running out of resources to fight the war. Second, their economy is bad. Third, they view Ukraine as vulnerable. And fourth, they see that the United States as utterly impotent. And there's a lot to be said for all of those points. Modern warfare is not as much obstructed by winter as it would have been 80 years ago, mainly because you don't have to have specially good conditions to launch missiles at somebody else. But there's a lot of reasons that Russia's pushing right now. They want Ukraine to crack before Russia cracks. And I mentioned this earlier, NATO allies believe that Russian President Vladimir Putin is aiming to recapture the territory lost to Ukraine and Kursk before Trump's inauguration. Again, this seems to be just a general assessment going on right now. North Korean troops have been moved to the front lines in Kursk and are now actively engaged in combat with Ukraine, according to South Korea's spy agency. From the Institute for the Study of War, this is from 2 days ago, kind of an overview of the situation. Russian forces are successfully leveraging their recent seizure of Vuhledar to make tactically significant gains south of Kurakhove in support of ongoing Russian offensive operations that aim to level the front line and eliminate the Ukrainian salient in western Donetsk Oblast. Kind of a long way to say that Russia's taking advantage of the situation in that area. Kind of an overview of some of the things going on here. You can see the map from the perspective of the Institute for the Study of War, of where the hotspots are. Russian forces reportedly continue to advance in the Donetsk-Zaporizhia Oblast border area, and Russian advances northwest of Vuhledar and south of Velika Novosilka may begin to pressure Ukrainian positions in Velika Novosilka. Russian forces have advanced in western Donetsk Oblast at a moderate tempo, but Russian forces remain highly unlikely to be able to conduct rapid mechanized maneuver that could successfully encircle Ukrainian forces. And this is also talking about the dam that was destroyed, causing flooding in nearby settlements. Now here's the situation on the deep state map. There's been no change in the Kursk lines in some time now, or in the lines near near Volchansk or Lybok in this area here near Kharkiv. Over here in the east, though, there has been some changes going on. Not big ones, but it's like it looks like Russia's trying to straighten out the lines up here on the north end. You can kind of see that if you bit back and forth between the two. Then this one's kind of weird, but I understand what's going on, at least at the broadest level. This is day before yesterday. Here's yesterday. The Russians are pushing along this reservoir, trying to get as much of this territory secured while they have the advantage in the area. This is was hard fought for territory, but at least from the Russian perspective, it's relatively easy to defend because the Ukrainians aren't going to cross the reservoir. Now, the previously very active area near Chasiv Yar and New York is basically dead still. The situation near Kurakhove right here has a lot of little itty bitty changes. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit because they're hard to see because of how itty bitty they are. Yes, day before yesterday, then yesterday. Just a lot of little stuff going on, small stuff all along the line. And that's going to be tougher for Ukraine to counter. Just a teeny tiny change here. Novodarivka here. Tiny right there. And no changes to speak of near Robotna or Lahova here in the Zaporizhia area. I keep hearing that there's been a new offensive in this area, but I've seen no good information on exactly the nature of it at this point in time. And that's the high level overview there. So if that's all you're here for, you got it. Very bloody battles are going on in the Kursk Oblast. After a failed attack of the first day of operation, the enemy used a bare minimum in terms of using AFV at my flank and in the center. But today, 4 attacks took place only in my flank. And this officer talks about these attacks continuing, the number of BMBDs and BMPs they've destroyed in this area. Kursk is very active right now. Indications are between the North Korean forces and the forces pulled from other fronts that Russia's got about 50,000 men in that area trying to retake that territory. Andrew Perpetua mentions there has been an advance by Ukraine in Bilohorivka. I've not seen this reported anywhere else just yet. And this is from a couple of days ago, so this may not be confirmed, or it may have just been folded into a bunch of the other updates. The interesting part, though, is that the trench lines that they're hitting here, the Russians are hitting, are new construction ones. Happened over about the last 5 months or so. So this is new construction trench lines that are being attacked. From mill blogger Romanov, that's a Russian mill blogger there, the assaults in Kursk on November 7th. What you see in the footage, he says, is the result of yet another lie from the local command to the general staff. False information had previously been reported that the road where the equipment was later blown up had come under our control. Logically, after receiving this information, the general staff issued an order to storm the settlement. Before the attack, no one even thought to clear the road of mines. Disinformation in the Russian army, deliberate lies, result in the loss of Russian lives. 50,000 troops, including North Korean troops in the Kursk area. From Sky News, Russian forces could launch ground assaults in Ukraine's southern Zaporizhia region in a matter of days. Again, I've been hearing this several times now, but not seen it actually show up on the maps and the things going on the ground. I did note that there was a step up in the tempo of attacks on, like missile attacks on Zaporizhia area. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. War Gonzo pretty much says that there's been some advances in the Zaporizhia area by the Russian forces in the Marfopol area. Donetsky talks about advances in several directions at once, which we already talked about before. Chasiv Yar, he's very vague about that, saying they're improving their positions. which indicates they're not really advancing much. Kursk, though, is the most telling one. No significant changes in the lines of control. The Kursk area, Russian forces tried to cross the Psel River and were destroyed immediately on the water and along with the boat, and then on land afterward as the survivors tried to come back together. More Ukrainian prisoners of war executed by Russian forces. Sersky made a visit to frontline soldiers in the Krishchina area. The situation, he says, remains tense. The Russian army, reinforced by North Korean mercenaries, has been relentlessly assaulting our positions for 3 days, losing equipment and personnel, but our soldiers have not lost a single meter. Ukrainians fighting their best. From the Ukraine control map, in the Kursk direction, Russian forces entered Darino, with heavy fighting near the Novoivanovka and near Pogrebki. My pronunciations are getting lost today. And Russian mechanized forces entered Dunje, south of Kurakhove, before being repelled, which is something that wasn't mentioned by anybody else. So that got pushed back south of Kurakhove. So interesting changes there. There is this report of an attempted assault in the Zaporizhia direction being repelled. Again, the amount of information I'm seeing is just kind of spotty on this. Then Zelensky talked about promising technology against Russian guided bombs. How they're going to jam those guided bombs should be an interesting thing that we're going to be watching for. Already talked about that. Russian forces now operate Novosiliadivka in the north and south. They have crossed the fields, approaching the outskirts of Dalny. The first skirmishes are already reported. So there's a lot of things going on in this area, which is we talked about earlier. And the Institute for the Study of War reports advances near Toretsk and in the Kursk Oblast. Some maps there if you want to take a quick look at it, pause it and look at it later. And that's kind of the front line situation. For 2 weeks of stuff, not been a lot of huge changes, but still a lot of things going on. Like I said, I think the Russians are trying their best to break Ukraine before Ukraine breaks them. Now the interesting extras. Machine for destroying drones. This is an M240 machine gun mounted to a... Let's see, how loud is the noise on this thing? Not at all. Okay, perfect. Oh, man, the video paused. Let's try that again. Now, that's kind of loud, so let me turn that down a bit so I can talk over it. This is an M240 Bravo machine gun mounted to a small tower and able to take out tiny drones using not radar, but by using an electro-optical sensor and special computer with AI and targeting of these drones. This is pretty awesome, actually, because this is one of the biggest problems on the front lines. And we'll have to see how this actually works in practice. Thought that was just pretty darn cool. This soldier was captured by the fighters of the 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov. He was actually delivering ammunition and supplies when his truck was hit by a drone. He managed to get out, but he got lost and turned around. And a couple of Ukrainian drones attacked him and got near him. And he finally surrendered and was guided to Ukrainian lines for a surrender. Now, look at this guy. He's not exactly a spring chicken. From Ann Applebaum, land for peace sounds nice, but Putin isn't fighting for land. He is fighting to destroy Ukraine as a nation. And Chris states, this is the point at which Ukraine's Western detractors repeatedly miss. This isn't a war over territory. It's an attempt to wipe an entire country off the map, as Saddam Hussein attempted to do to Kuwait in 1990. Fact is that if Russia had managed to take Kyiv in the first few days like they intended to, they would have this would have been over long ago. And Ukraine would be a vassal state of Russia with a partisan action going on that would be problematic. Not related to the war in Ukraine, but a Spirit Airlines flight attempted to land in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, but was struck with gunfire that passed through the cabin of the plane. The plane did divert and land safely in the Dominican Republic. Hunters in the Kaluga region in Russia spotted some Ukrainian drones going by, and so they pulled out their shotguns and tried to shoot down the drone. Considering the scale involved here, I would say that they were well outside the effective range of even buckshot to take down a drone of this size. Not to mention the fact that they don't appear to be aiming their shotguns high enough. A Ukrainian soldier uses a Steam Deck controlled remote weapon system to engage a Russian target with 7.62 millimeter fire. This is my son's got a Steam Deck, and the thing's interesting setup there. This is the type of creativity that the Ukrainians bring to the fight. They can control this stuff with whatever they have to hand, whatever devices they can put together, even gaming consoles like the Steam Deck. How about an M712 Copperhead 155 millimeter laser guided artillery shell? Ukraine has been putting some out there, at least recently, and this is the first pictures we're seeing. Its claim to fame is its ability to put a 15-pound shaped charge on a moving target 10 miles away from the artillery system. Pretty slick little piece of kit. I think I'm going to just go ahead and skip this one. It's interesting, but not that interesting. Go straight for this one, a U.S.-made M2 Bradley in service with the 100th Mechanized Brigade. Armored, protection, firepower, and mobility all in one IFV. The Ukrainians love the Bradley. That's doing the job it was intended to do, and it does it amazingly well. How about a little bit of a meeting between an owner and his dog once more? It looks like he's returning from the front lines. The dog's not sure what to make of it at first. But gradually realizes what's going on. And he wants to play. And he's happy. And he's so happy. How about evacuating cats from Kupiansk? I say it many times, that the fact that Ukrainians spend time and effort to save the animals says far more about their heart. Speaking of animals and rescuing animals, here is a abandoned village. Everyone left but this dog, who was captured by the soldier and taken out of danger. Love and kindness are never wasted. They always make a difference. And we'll end off with the most important part of your everyday combat requirement. As you can see, he's delivering lead on target as he makes sure that his rifle is prepared. But in the middle of it all, as rounds hit his dugout here, he's got to get his coffee in. It's the most important part of the day for him. And immediately back into the action there. I just thought that was funny. Coffee is mandatory, says War Monitor Clips. And that's everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Always glad to have you here, and I appreciate you, every single one. But it was a great group here today, and a lot of great commentary, and I appreciate every bit. It makes it worth the effort. My hope is to find a way to maybe start doing much shorter live streams on this, so I can get some done on a more regular basis. I'm working on it. Life has been really busy right now. I spent a week in another state helping out my employer, and boy, were those some long days. I'm glad to be home and able to get back online. So thank you very much for joining me. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.